Vladimir Putin met in Moscow today with Trump's envoys Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner. A peace agreement on Ukraine was discussed. And all the media paid attention to Putin's statements in which he threatened Europe with war and threatened to cut Ukraine off from the sea. He boasted about Russians allegedly capturing Pokrovska and Volkanska in Donetsk and Kharkiv. But few people paid attention to the fact that behind the scenes, negotiations were taking place between representatives of three countries, the United States, Russia, and China. Why is that? The thing is, by a strange coincidence, the head of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi, is in Moscow at the same time as the United States Special Envoy, Stephen Witkoff. An interesting puzzle comes together here. China has invited the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, for talks. He will be in Beijing as early as tomorrow, December 3rd, and will stay there until the 5th. Earlier, Emmanuel Macron met with Volodymyr Zelensky to discuss all issues related to the peace plan. And right now, China is offering Europe a deal that could strengthen Europe's very own strategic autonomy, understanding that the Americans are stepping back from affairs. And also to show that without China, the issue of Russia's war against Ukraine cannot be resolved, and that Russia and the United States shouldn't get too close, as Donald Trump wants. And of course, to raise the issue of Taiwan. This episode will be interesting, as the Moscow negotiations involve three countries, not two. My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and write any detailed comment under it. In addition, subscribe to my Telegram channel Pichi News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. And if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or paid subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. Thanks for any support you give. So, I'll start with a short briefing. Today, Putin is holding military talks in Moscow. United States Special Representative Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner are meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Earlier, Putin accused European leaders of trying to block the peace agreement allegedly proposed by the United States. He also stated that he is ready to fight with Europe and is confident that Russia would quickly win a war against Europeans. At the same time, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, described the current diplomatic situation as, quote, one of the most difficult and at the same time most optimistic moments. The president of Ukraine, who is currently in Dublin, also stated that he may meet with representatives of the United States soon after the Russian-American meeting in Moscow. He added he is waiting for signals after talks between Putin and Witkoff. Meanwhile, Putin claims Russia has taken Pokrovsk, a key city in eastern Ukraine. Although Ukraine rejected what it called loud statements from Moscow aimed simply at influencing the negotiations. And in Washington, Trump convened a cabinet meeting with members of his administration today. And there he stated that the situation in the negotiations is complicated. But he is proud that the United States is no longer helping Ukraine for free, but simply selling weapons and making money from the war. And here new details emerge about what exactly the White House is promising Putin. Politico reports that the administration of United States President Donald Trump plans to return Russia's frozen assets after signing a deal on Ukraine and ending the war. It is reported that American officials informed the European Union's envoy on sanctions, David O'Sullivan, about this during his visit to Washington back in the summer, and since then they have not changed their position. At the same time, in the original peace plan that the United States presented in mid-November, it was about using $100 billion of Russian assets for the reconstruction of Ukraine. According to the document, Washington was to receive 50% of the profit, while Europe was asked to contribute another $100 billion to boost investment in Ukraine.
The rest.
Russia's remaining assets were intended for a certain American-Russian investment fund, which would work on American-Russian projects. According to Politico sources, Russian officials were outraged at the prospect that the United States would take part of the assets, even if nominally they would go toward rebuilding Ukraine's economy, and the rest would simply be split with the Russians. Later, as Bloomberg reported, the provision on using Russian assets was excluded from the peace plan. Meanwhile, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen proposed granting Ukraine a reparations loan of 140 billion euros secured by Russia's frozen assets. However, the European Central Bank refused to provide guarantees for such a loan. According to the Financial Times, European officials approached this bank with a request to act as a lender for the Belgian depository Euroclear, where the main part of Russia's assets is held. Well, the regulator concluded that the proposal is equivalent to monetary financing, which is actually prohibited by European Union treaties. Belgium also opposes giving Kyiv a loan backed by Russian assets. Negotiations between Ukrainian and American diplomats in Florida, held before Witkoff's visit to Moscow, reportedly made no progress on the territorial issue Witkoff and Putin discussed today. Kyiv reportedly still refuses to grant special status to Donbas, which Putin demands, while Russia also rejects any ceasefire. Putin himself confirmed at the end of last week that Russia is not ready to stop military actions until the Ukrainian army leaves, as he says, the occupied territories. But Putin also directly stated that it is supposedly impossible to sign any agreement, but that's the public part. But behind the scenes, there is another component of these negotiations, the involvement of China. And China is clearly now watching Vladimir Putin's actions to make sure he doesn't accidentally give up China's interest. The thing is, due to a strange turn of events, today the head of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi, arrived in Moscow at the same time as the United States Special Envoy, Stephen Witkoff, who met with Putin in the Kremlin to discuss a peace agreement on Ukraine. Officially, it was stated that Wang Yi held consultations with the Secretary of Russia's Security Council, Sergei Shoigu. They discussed the cooperation between the special services of the Russian Federation and China, as well as current issues of international and regional security. These aren't really matters for the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I'll say that up front. After the meeting, Wang Yi chose to stay in Moscow, saying, "I'll stay here a little longer." And this is where things get really interesting. Now we start putting the puzzle pieces together. From December 3rd to 5th, Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, will be visiting China. The discussion will focus on economic and cooperation issues involving France, the European Union, and China. That is, Macron will be speaking on behalf of the European Union. It's telling that the visit will take place before the meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, and the visit is being organized at the invitation of the Chinese side. That is, China itself invited Macron for negotiations. The results could become a clear demonstration of the dynamics of the European policy's autonomy, meaning the process when a European Union country acts not only in line with United States policy. Macron has insisted on this since 2017. Those who have been watching my channel for a long time already know that I always refer to this. What is it? In 2017, Macron said Europe needs strategic autonomy, not relying on the United States, China, or anyone else. We must be autonomous. Now this is going to show itself. Macron immediately stated that he would talk to the Chinese about the Russia-Ukraine war. Here's a quote for you. "We hope that China can persuade Russia to end this war and start negotiations, which will respect the fundamental rights of Ukraine and allow us to achieve peace and security on the European continent." But here you might ask, why does China need all this? Actually, it's not that complicated. It's a demonstration that this issue, meaning the question of Russia's war against Ukraine, cannot be resolved without China's involvement. This is a very strong move, especially after such loud attempts by Trump. Xi Jinping says Trump can't handle it. In addition, China will try to prevent an overly active Russian-American track because China sees that there is a risk that these two countries might get closer. And large-scale concessions for the Kremlin will become a starting point from which Russia will try to regain its influence in regions that were once its own. What does that mean? In Moscow, they view Central Asia and the Caucasus as their own regions. Recently, China has moved into these territories and is establishing itself. Precisely during the period of the full-scale war in Central Asia and the Caucasus, China is starting to take a dominant position. Previously, that position was held by Russia. And today, Tajikistan has announced that it is calling for Russian troops to help protect its border from Afghanistan. There was a shootout there in November, and by the way, a Chinese citizen was killed during that shootout. And Tajikistan is asking not China, but Russia to help them. It's clear that this is all staged, and China definitely doesn't like how things are unfolding. And one more important point is the Taiwan issue. Of course, in 2023, China proposed its own peace plan for Ukraine. And back then, many were puzzled by the first point, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. At that time, even Putin, let me remind you, criticized this plan of Comrade C. But for China, this is important. And all this is not happening out of great love for Ukraine. Taiwan is considered by Beijing to be an inseparable part of China. The recognition of these so-called new Russian territories, especially through the stage of so-called People's Republics like the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, is a very bad precedent for Beijing. Putin is now demanding that Europe and the United States recognize that by acknowledging the independence of the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, these territories ultimately became Russian. This is very bad for China. Because then you can boldly, point to Taiwan and say, listen, it's actually a separate republic. You recognize Luhansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic, so why talk about a unified China? What are we even discussing? And finally, I'll give you one more thought to ponder so you have something to think about. As for Stephen Witkoff, the trip to Moscow is one of the last attempts to make progress with the peace process in Ukraine before Donald Trump goes to China. The Russian Federation is unlikely to back down from its demands now. And we can see this from the results of the meeting between Putin and Witkoff. Therefore, any outlines of the future peace process, a real peace process, will already be shaped along the lines of the United States, Europe, and China. This is where Macron enters the group. And now the task of Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is precisely to make sure in Moscow that they don't make a deal with the Americans. So that this peace process is postponed to 2026 and so that the world recognizes that they can't solve this issue without China. That's the puzzle. I'll leave it at that in this episode. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. To be continued.